everyone, and welcome to our latest Two Writers Talking event tonight. My name is Jillian Brillo with Doubleday. I have just a few housekeeping items to touch on before I turn things over to tonight's phenomenal speakers. If you'd like to submit questions for our speakers, you can do so by utilizing the question and answer module, which should be available at the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote questions submitted by others. You can activate the Zoom chat, which should also be at the bottom of your screen, and comment along with the conversation. We would suggest toggling your chat from all panelists, which is the default, to chatting all panelists and attendees. This will make your comments available to the whole group and perhaps spark some friendly discussion. Now I'm going to ask Ingrid, Megha, and David to start their microphones and cameras to come on to the digital stage. Yay, I think David's camera might lag a little bit, but it should turn on very soon. And once it does, I'll turn things over to him and pop off. But we hope you enjoy the event tonight.
Hi everyone, sorry for that lag. My computer is a little delayed. I'm David Canfield with Entertainment Weekly, a staff editor and book critic, and I am so excited for this Two Writers Talking series to be talking debut novels with the authors of two of my favorites of the last few years, Megha Majumdar and Ingrid Rojas Contreras. Thank you both so much for joining us, and thank you to everybody for being here. Megha is the author of A Burning, which is a New York Times bestseller, and Ingrid is the author of Fruit of the Drunken Tree, which published in 2018, and also a national bestseller. I should say that was one of EW's best debut novels of the year, and Megha's A Burning is on EW's best books of the year so far list, so endorsements from our publication. Not that that's the most important thing. We're talking experiences of publishing debut novels, and I feel like it's only fitting to start by asking a little bit about how different your two's experiences have been. Ingrid published hers in a, let's say, pre-pandemic world, got to travel a little bit, talk about her book on the road, whereas Megha, obviously, circumstances have been a little different. So Megha, I'll start with you. What was the process of publishing a debut novel like for you? I imagine it was not what you would have expected.
No, it has been completely surreal. Can I just take a second to say thank you to David? You have lifted up this book in really profound and important ways, and I'm so grateful for that. And thank you to Ingrid. I've been a fan of yours for a while. I loved your book. You've been so generous to me already, and I'm really glad that we get to chat. It's been really strange, but I think I've been really grateful that we can Zoom and crowdcast and all of these things. And, you know, there is a sense of people coming together to chat about books still, even though it is in such a different format. I think for a while I was worried that people wouldn't really want to stay on screens after a work day, and, you know, it would just be too much screen time for everyone. I didn't know if there would be interest in virtual book events, but I'm so grateful for everybody who comes to these and supports authors.
Ingrid, what about for you? Looking at, say, Megha's experience, how are you reflecting on yours from a few years ago now?
Honestly, I was talking to a writer friend who had a debut the same year, and we were just, we were chatting, and we couldn't believe that we ever complained about travel and just going to cities and seeing people. So I think that there were things that maybe because we were exhausted at the time, we like to complain about. But it was, all of it was such a gift, really. And I think in a similar way, maybe to, I don't know, Megha, your experience, but I think I remember just losing track of time because there were like so many kind of events to do and things to write and ways to kind of put the book in the hands of people who would maybe respond to it or care about it. And I remember actually one of my favorite things that I really came to love about book tour was the moment when I was on a plane and writing on planes. So I was just kind of like, and I think I'm in the time of the pandemic where like I'm in the nostalgia stage right now, so I should say that. Yeah, so I was just kind of thinking about what that was like, just how lucky and what an honor and how beautiful that whole experience was.
Let's talk a little bit about I think what makes these particular books so unique and special. Ingrid, you were born in Colombia, and Megha, you were born in India, and both of your debuts are set in your countries of birth. And I'm curious, given that these were popular books in the United States, what the writing process was like for you in terms of really, for a lot of people, introducing your own countries to a pretty large audience, and then also what the reactions were like and what you thought of those and how that felt. Ingrid, I'll start with you on that one.
I remember when I was drafting the novel and I knew that it was going to be largely set in Colombia. I remember getting a lot of early comments asking me why I wanted to publish it here. So I think early on what I kept hearing was that the United States wasn't a market that would be interested in reading a novel that happened overseas largely, and that didn't happen here. And I don't know, I never truly believed that that was true. And I always was interested in, because I'm a first generation immigrant, I think that I really just wanted to tell what that experience is like when I've just kind of like lived a whole nother life somewhere else and you get here and it's almost like things start again. You know, like when you move to another country specifically, like you don't know anybody, everything is new, the culture is different. It feels like you are just beginning kind of like a new chapter. And that experience to me was so strange that I couldn't imagine telling kind of like the new part of living in the United States before telling like what the other experience that's weighing that down, what that is. And yeah, and then I, of course, like, and then none of that, those concerns of like, a United States audience is not going to be interested in a story that takes overseas. Of course, it's not true. And yeah, and I think for me, I was going through visas at the time, so I couldn't travel back to Colombia. And so for me, like part of wanting to imagine the country and just visiting it through writing and just a lot of the writing of plays came from from the reality of I actually couldn't go back and see it. So I was just kind of like creating a world in which I could enter it and experience it.
Megha, what about you?
I know that struggle with visas so well. I think, and this is something that you have done so beautifully in your book, Ingrid, but I think this question of introducing people to a place that they don't know much about, maybe, I think for me, I wanted to write a book which feels really rich and complex and doesn't simplify anything. And that's what I felt in your book, Ingrid, is that you do that so beautifully. And I think that is part of actually, and perhaps counterintuitively for some people, that relentlessness, you know, that attention to the visuals and textures and the particular kinds of intelligence and humor and the ways in which people speak. When you really allow yourself, I felt, to sink into that and bring that to your book in a really unapologetic way, then I think people who are picking up a book about a place that they have never been to, don't know much about, I think they still feel called to it, because it's not, you know, you're not presenting a diorama of the place. It's not a flattened version. You're trying to bring the richness of the place, its contradictions, and you're really trusting the reader to be smart about it, you know, and to bring their own thoughtfulness to the book. So I think preserving that complexity felt really important to me, especially because I was writing about my home country. And, you know, it's so funny that you had that confidence, Ingrid, because while I was writing, I really didn't think that there would be much interest in the US in a book which is set entirely in India. So this has been a really wonderful and strange surprise. But I guess in some ways, some of the things that the book deals with have become sadly pertinent. I mean, in many ways, they have always been pertinent, but I think they have come to a place where you can't ignore it. You have to think about it and face it.
How do you think about your book after you publish it, when those kinds of things happen, when its relevance reveals itself, maybe not in a new way, but in a resurgent way, let's say? How do you reflect on your book then?
You know, you never know. I mean, novels take so long to write. I think even in my experience of writing the novel, you know, part of my novel uses a lot of history in the 90s. And so I was constantly reading back through the newspapers and reading the history of the 90s in Colombia. And I was also, you know, keeping up with like current events. You know, sadly for us, history is kind of very like cyclical, but violent. And so it's in some ways, I think all Colombians are constantly like every generation is constantly hoping for to like exit the cycle of violence, and then it seems like we are, and then the cycle starts again. So I was thinking about that a lot, about how maybe if we take a look at one year's history, it seems like very unique, but sometimes if we step back, there's a way, and how Megha was saying, like that things are cyclical and things have been present for a long time. So yeah, I think books have that wonderful ability of tapping into what is happening in real time, and because, you know, writers kind of catch the dregs of that, and then they just kind of, they find their relevance, like however that is coming out into the current history. So I wasn't, yeah, so it was interesting to see like how things were changing politically in Colombia. And I got a lot of readers who were seeing parallels between Colombia and Mexico because of the drug violence that they've been experiencing for a while. So it was just, you know, relevant to different histories in ways that I couldn't have imagined.
Meg, I'm interested for you too, because your book was selected by Jenna Bush Hager for her Today Show book club, which obviously introduces it to a very different, more general kind of audience in a lot of ways, particularly arriving at this moment in time. How did you find that an interaction with a different kind of readership?
You know, something that surprised me just about having the book out in the world, and maybe it shouldn't have been surprising because I also work as an editor, so I work very closely with writers, but it did surprise me, is how vulnerable I felt. You know, all of a sudden, here was this document which not only I had worked on it for so long, but also it's really a document of my efforts and my failures, you know, and all of a sudden it's packaged as a finished thing when I feel like, well, I just let it go, but I don't know if it's really finished, you know. And even now when I pick up the book to do a reading or something, I'll cringe at a sentence and wish I'd changed it or something like that. And so that feeling of vulnerability was really surprising. And I think more so because, you know, like you said, I was hearing from lots of people, but I think the really beautiful thing has been hearing from people who perhaps picked up the book knowing nothing about Indian politics and, you know, knowing nothing about the kind of reality that I was talking about, and still felt that they could connect with it. And I found that so encouraging. You know, that's what you're trying to do with the book, is you're trying to communicate something. So when a reader picks it up and feels that by bringing their own experiences, their own feelings, their own thoughts to the book, they are kind of completing the book for you in a way, you know, and that's been really magical to see.
To go back to the beginning of the process for both of you, given that these were your first novels, how long did it take you to write them? What was your process like? And what did you learn, perhaps mistakes made or things you wouldn't do again that you would bring to your second book? Ingrid?
My novel took seven years to write. And I took a break in between somewhere in there, so I wasn't writing it for some years. I think probably, well, this is the most useful. I'm always collecting metaphors from, you know, writers who are working on novels about what writing a novel is like. And this has been my favorite of all time that I've heard. But a friend of mine described it as you are like on one side of a lake, and it's this very big lake, and you have your boat, and then you get on and you're like, okay, I just have to go like across, like I can totally see where I'm going. And then you get in and suddenly you're in the middle and you can't see like anything. Like all you see is water. And you're like, I've been alone in this boat for like years, you know, like that's what it feels like to me. So I think that process is just it's hard. And once you do it, once you know somehow find your way to the other shore, I think I have so much more clarity with my second book, or maybe I trust that I can get there, and I know all the ways in which I can get there. Something that I learned when I was editing, I think I didn't pay too or differentiate between what it would mean like to line edit or to just read the whole book through in order to get a sense of what the whole thing was sounding like, to get a sense of shape and structure and things like that. And so that's one thing that I learned through writing my first book, and that I now treat differently when I'm editing.
The metaphor is so vivid.
It's also terrifying.
Yes, it is. It really is. I'm not even a novelist, and that is a very terrifying metaphor.
I think so. You know, you can really approach this question on different levels. You can think about it in terms of what you're actually doing with the text, I think, and then you can think about it in terms of process. And on the kind of more abstract process level, I think one thing I told myself is that I have to finish this. I worked on this book for 4 years, and it felt like a very long time. And I knew that, you know, nobody cared if I wrote a book or not. The world wasn't waiting for my book. It was just up to me if I felt like I wanted to write this book enough. And it was the first time that I had tried to write a novel, tried to write something so big. And I think just the discipline of sitting down and finishing it and knowing that, you know, an unfinished novel is nothing. So either I finish it or I have nothing. That was kind of hard, but I'm glad I paid attention to that. I also learned to ask myself or ask my manuscript really tough questions. I would always ask, while rereading, I would ask, where am I bored? And where am I confused? You know, so if I want to, while reading my own pages, if I want to put it down and go over to Twitter and look at something else, then that is terrible because I'm, you know, I've written something that's boring, where perhaps the movement is too slow, maybe I'm lingering too long, maybe I'm repeating something, I'm boring myself. And so I think paying attention to boredom and confusion, lack of clarity, was really hard, but also really important. And then, you know, in terms of the text, I learned to think about all of these specific things, like what is each sentence doing? And I think sometimes, I mean, you just talked about coming back to your sentences, Ingrid, but and rereading, but I think sometimes when you are faced with just pages and pages, it can be hard to look at each sentence and say, what is this doing? You know, when you like pick up a sentence and you turn it around and you knock it about, is it true? Is it the deepest level of truthfulness? And sometimes it's not there yet, and I can feel it, and I like shy away from those sentences. I don't want to read them, I want to skip over them, but that tells me something, you know? So I think asking of my pages, sentence by sentence, is this truthful, was something I learned to do.
You mentioned boredom, which I think is an interesting idea in the context of your two books. I hate describing books generally that way, but especially these two novels, while very rich and thematically complicated, there's this suspenseful element that makes them, you know, page turners, for lack of a better word. I'm curious, given that they are such complex and rich creations, what the function of suspense was for both of you, and finding that balance. Ingrid, I'll start with you there.
You know, I was thinking when I was crafting the novel, one of the things that I really wanted to convey about what it would be like to grow up in Colombia, or my experience of what that was like, was that violence or danger kind of snuck up on you. It was just, it felt like a very kind of like slow boil. Like you could, if you kind of looked back, you could say like, oh, I see how things were progressing, or I see the signs of things getting worse. But I think when we were living it, that danger and violence weren't obvious. And it was only kind of obvious in retrospect. So when I was crafting the novel, I think I wanted to get a similar emotion into it. And because it's a children's point of view, then it was just kind of very interesting, because then it's kind of like very young girls noticing small things that they can't quite make sense of, but that the reader starts to kind of feel some kind of disturbance about. So I really liked creating that, and I think, you know, I really love what you were saying, Megha, about asking things, or asking if your novel like is this true. That was one of the things that felt like I needed to get in there for it to feel true.
Suspense. I'm so glad you asked this, David, because this is something that I think about. You know, it's so important to a novel, but how does anybody create it? I don't know. I think I tried to be very attentive to a sense of fun which might be a strange thing to say about a novel, which I hope does have serious things to say, but I felt that the most powerful way in which this book could say those things was by being kind of fun and moving and having a real plot, you know, and all of these things are bound up with, I think so much of the movement in the book, or I hope that's what I tried to do, comes from people's ethical choices. You know, what choices will they make given these circumstances? And so it has, like, the crafting of it has everything to do with the content of the moral choices in the book, you know? So being really attentive to that, and also being really attentive to the function, I think, of each paragraph and each chapter. You know, what kind of movement does it bring to the book? I tried to think about, well, is this moving the narrative forward? Is it helping us gain insight into a character? What is each paragraph doing? And it was a new way of thinking for me because, you know, I think before I wrote this book, I was very much a tinkerer, you know, I would just kind of write for myself. But I tried thinking about my future self reading this with a cold and bored eye. You know, how can I snag this person? So I think thinking about that was helpful.
We're going to get to audience questions in a few moments. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you haven't to submit. Before we do, I wanted to ask both of you a little bit about, you know, how you're doing in this moment, particularly. You know, I've spoken to a lot of writers who have just felt like they really can't write right now, and conversely, I've spoken to many who have felt creatively invigorated. How have you found this moment creatively? What are you reading that's bringing you comfort? How are things?
I've been able to write, and yeah, it's been really wonderful to have that space. I've always been a little bit of a, you know, process-wise, I've always been a little neurotic about my process, and I think that really served me, because it's something that I kind of like do things the same way every day. So it kind of like helped me in this time to kind of like give myself structure, and it didn't feel like I was doing anything differently for a long time. Yeah, so I've been able to write, and I've just kind of been looking for all kinds of things that can bring me small joys. So currently I'm really into temporary tattoos. This is just what I'm doing with my time. This is my latest one. And I don't know, I just like something changing, you know, like if we're inside, then I just want something to change. And so I think that's what it is. Yeah. And but you know, yeah, reading the news, of course, and doing kind of like the community work that I can do and all that kind of thing is difficult, and it's kind of a strain on, you know, my nerves and creative system and everything. So I've been really thankful to have a creative practice that I already kind of engaged in to have that to fall back on.
I've been writing, but I think it's a balance of, I try to be pretty disciplined and write most days in the morning before I start my job. But also there are days when I can't wake up that early, or I wake up that early and then I end up reading the book that I was reading the night before. And that becomes, you know, how I spend my morning, and just being compassionate with myself. And so I think it's a balance of discipline and compassion for me this summer.
How early do you wake up?
I try to wake up at 6, but it doesn't always happen. Maybe it's not even that early. I feel like people wake up much earlier. Do you have a morning practice, Ingrid?
What's that?
Do you have a morning practice too?
Yeah, I wake up at maybe like 7, and I have like a whole wardrobe of writing outfits that are the same color. And so when it's writing time, I put one of these outfits on, and I don't wear this color when I'm in my regular life. So I'm trying to give myself kind of like I'm trying to train my body to associate that color with writing so that when I put it on, there's like no resistance to writing. Yeah. So I usually, I'm also a morning writer. I love writing in the morning.
Wow, I love that idea of the wardrobe.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
How is your writing and criticism going, David? How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's a tumultuous time for media, but you know, hanging in. I think that these events make me feel more human in a way. Some form of interaction with other people who I greatly admire, and audience members who have questions. Did everyone like that transition? I hope so.
Very smooth.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions, and I'm gonna get started. First question, and I'll go to Megha. What advice do you have for young writers?
What advice do I have? For somebody who is just looking for a first project or kind of feeling their way around to a story or an essay, I would say to perhaps think about what makes you angry. I think that's a very fruitful place. What is the thing that fills you with rage? What do you keep reading about in the news? You know, whatever you feel strongly about, that place of high emotion is often where a really powerful story can start. And then on a more practical level, I would say, you know, I think perhaps it's helpful to know that I definitely feel that every time I sit down to write, I am confronting my failures on the page. You know, I have a vision for perhaps how a scene should go in my head, or I have a sense for how a certain sentence should feel. But I find that when I write the words, they're kind of clumsy and they're not really, you know, my dream is for it to be something up here, and what I can accomplish is it's something down here. And maybe I do that day after day, and I come back to a paragraph that makes me cringe, and I know it's not it. So it's very uncomfortable often, you know, sitting down with your failures, watching yourself try and fail over and over and over. So if that's any comfort to know, that's often how writing feels like for me. But after a long time, it starts getting better. And hopefully you're able to get to a place where you feel that the story or essay or poem is achieving its own ambition.
What about you, Ingrid?
I think community is important. Finding community. I had while I was writing my book, I started I didn't start it, but a friend started it and I joined a group of women of color who are writers. And it wasn't like we weren't exchanging work. We would just get together and hang out for like 5 hours and eat and just talk about what we were working on, or like what we were going through in our personal lives. And that kind of, I think that kind of what that kind of community can do for your life and your creative work in the long run is really important. Like what Megha was saying about like having to persevere and having to show up again and again and like repeat, and even after you fail, like having to do that again. You know, having a group of people that have your back and that are maybe going through the same experience makes that so much more possible and maybe like a little fun.
Well, sort of relatedly, our next question for both of you, with regards to getting your work published here in the United States, what helped and what didn't help, and specifically, did networking with other editors and writers help you?
I can start.
Go ahead.
What was the process of getting published, and did networking help?
Yeah, what helped and what didn't help?
In getting published? Well, something that really helped was when I got to, well, this is taking a couple steps back, but I found it so helpful. I want to share it, which is that the first time that I thought my manuscript was ready to be shared, it wasn't. So I feel like the first few times that you feel like your book is ready to go out on, you know, to agents, perhaps it isn't. So I put it down for a few weeks, and when I came back to it, and I could see all of these things that I wanted to fix. So that was really helpful, doing that a few times. And then when I felt like, okay, it's I'm ready to approach agents, I found it really helpful to be very thoughtful about it. I looked for agents who had published writers that I loved, books that I had read and loved, and a helpful way of doing this for anybody wondering is you can look at the acknowledgements section of a book, and the agent will typically be thanked and the editor will be thanked too. So then you can kind of Google them and see what other books they've published and that kind of thing. So to have a very clear sense of, okay, this is a person who might share a creative vision with me and they have championed work that I love, that was very important. So I did that. And then what else was helpful? Just to be, you know, a human through it. I think sometimes people can get a little bit caught up in, oh, what is the etiquette for writing to an agent? Will they reject me if I make a typo in the email, you know? But I think as long as you kind of go to their website and look at their submission rules and follow them to the best of your ability, understand that you're writing to an incredibly busy person who's probably getting dozens of queries a day. And just remember that at the other end of your emails and queries, there's a person, there's probably a couple people. I think that always helps, is that you're just a person trying to find a match for your book. It's not a power play. It's not anything twisted. It's just people trying to find the right match.
Yeah.
I think that, let's see, I think in the same way that Megha, you just had such a, I admire that you were able to just put it down and not tinker with it anymore. Because I could not. But what I did was I would prepare like excerpts of the novel and try to place them in literary magazines. And so this was my way of putting it down. And so while I was waiting to see if this novel excerpt would be accepted or not, I wouldn't look at the novel at all. And then when it came back, I think that there's something clarifying about rejection, that you kind of like can see that the work is not at the potential where it can be yet. And so for me, that was the moment where I would return. I just kind of sit down and just want to figure out what it was that I could tinker or move, or like what it was that wasn't functioning yet where it should function. Yeah, so I used that in similar way of just putting it down. So if you have a hard time putting it down, then maybe that's a way to do it. I found my agent through a short story publication that was a novel excerpt. And I, had been looking before for agents, so that it felt like very lucky. And I love my agent now, so I'm very happy that we found each other. But yeah, I think it's important to remember, like when we I think the word like networking can feel so cold and clinical,
Mm.
but what it is, like if you just kind of take that term away, it's just that you are connecting with somebody else on something that you really care about. So either like you love their work, you're both kind of like looking for, and this is with like writer community, like you're maybe like both towing the same themes or something, or if it's with an agent, then it's kind of like you're both into the same kind of writing or the same kind of literary thing. And so I think that it maybe like when I think about it that way, then it feels more human and it feels easier.
Hmm. Our next question feels particularly resonant, I think, right now. How do you remain inspired, Ingrid?
I I I think that I follow my curiosity a lot, and I'm a very curious person. Um, so I don't know, there's something about just even being curious about like what the Craigslist like personal listings are like right now, and just kind of like losing an hour to that. There's something that's inspiring to me about that. Just like finding out something about the world feels like really inspiring. Or I don't know, I got really into like stargazing and watching like astrophysicist lectures, which I don't understand the math, but I just kind of like love the language of it. So yeah, there's things that I'm just like really curious about, and that just I feel that they're really nurturing and that are not directly writing related. And that for me, because when you're working on something for so long, you're gonna visit it every day. So I think for me, it's useful to have something else that's not writing related, where I can find that I'm like feeding myself somehow.
How about you, Megha?
I think two things come to mind. One is, so I've been in Brooklyn the whole time, and basically just taking walks in my own neighborhood over and over and over. And I think being attentive to what you see when you're on your pandemic walk, if you're taking pandemic walks, you have your mask on, you're walking down the same road that you've walked down 1,000 times, but perhaps there's something about, flowers or the pattern on a roof, or a person on the other side of the street does something, and thinking about that and really seeing it, not just letting your eyes kind of glide over it, but really thinking about what is that color, or what is happening with the light, or what did that person just do, what would be the word for it. I think that's kind of fun, and it keeps you observing, which is where so much writing can come from too. And the other thing is I really enjoy reading very widely. I'll read literary fiction, of course. Very noisy vehicle outside. Literary fiction, but then last week I read a book on AI, which I really enjoyed. It's just a beginner book for people who are interested in artificial intelligence, and I don't know anything about it, but it was just a funny book about it, and I learned so much. And just to read history or science or whatever calls your curiosity, to follow that, to read different genres if you're interested in it. I think that can be so inspiring.
Agreed. Yeah, I have also found that actually. I have a specific question now for each of you, starting with Megha. Is there a local bookstore with signed books where this questioner could get a signed copy of Burning?
Sure. There are a bunch of bookstores depending on where you are, but I'm pretty sure bookstores like Books Are Magic in New York, Green Apple in San Francisco, Books and Books in Miami have signed copies. Well, they're signed in the way of, I signed book plates, so they're kind of pasted into the book. And they're all of these stores are shipping nationwide. So yeah, check them out.
They're out there. And Ingrid, what is your second book about? Can you tease?
Yeah, my second book is a memoir, which is fun to write in a different genre.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like I have a whole new set of problems, and that's its own thing, but it's also like interesting. And it's about it's a family memoir, but it's kind of based on my grandfather, who was a curandero, or a faith healer. And people said that he could move clouds. And so my mom was, I think, the person that took the most after him. And she had a psychic business when I was growing up in the attic of our house. But how she came into, she could see ghosts, or she could hear them. And how she came into that is that she fell into an empty well, and she had this accident, lost her memory for 8 months. And so I had an accident in Chicago, a bike accident, where like a car opened their door into the bike lane, and I crashed into it. So I lost my memory as well. And my family was very excited that this happened, because they thought that it would mean that I would be able to like see ghosts or like hear them. So it's kind of like about that. It's about what you inherit, what you don't inherit. There's tons of really fun, magical stories. And the research has just been like so much fun to do.
Quickly before I move on, I'm curious, what has been like maybe a surprising challenge or particular, craft question that maybe has come up in doing memoir that has surprised you?
I knew this, but maybe like what has been the most surprising is how directly I am responsible for kind of I don't know, kind of like making sure that other people's stories are kind of like honored and respected and that kind of thing. And then and this is also obvious, but with fiction, you can kind of, what you want the story to do. And so you just write it. You just like write the scene that you need in order to give the tone that you want. And with memoir, it's more like you have all the pieces out and you want the feeling, and you're like, how did none of it? So that's kind of like it's been a really fun challenge. It's so different, but I love it. I love how different it is.
Excited to read it.
Excited to read it, yeah.
Megha, how has being a writer influenced your work as an editor, and vice versa? Do you work with writers differently now that you've experienced publication yourself? That's a good question.
That is a good question. I think I gained an understanding for how, or like publication, it's such a long process. It can take a year or even longer. And there are all of these steps that are so hidden from the author. Steps in production when the book is actually being made, or steps that publicity and marketing are doing that, are not really visible to the author. So I think I've become much more cognizant of how the process can seem really opaque. And I've been trying to do more to have calls with my authors where I kind of lay out what the process looks like once we're done doing text edits, so that they have a sense for, well, now we're done with edits, what's going to happen over the next 10 months, And I guess I hope that I have more empathy for just, you know, how strange it feels to work on something really privately and then have it go out into the world. I hope it makes me a more compassionate editor.
Hmm. Ingrid, do you have any recommendations for fellow female Colombian authors? The questioner mentions they love Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Juan Gabriel Vasquez, but any others to support?
Patricia Engel is one of my favorite Colombian American writers. I just love everything that she does. Veins of the Ocean is the last one that I read, and I was just completely wowed by this book. It happens in Miami, and there's this just gorgeous metaphor throughout of how the ocean is the thing that touches all the countries. So when you're an immigrant, going into the ocean kind of feels like you're indirectly coming in touch with the place where you left. And it's so beautiful, and she's such an amazing, just gorgeous writer. So I highly recommend you pick that one up.
Lovely. For both of you, I guess beyond the answer you just gave, who are some of your favorite writers' biggest influences? Megha, starting with you.
Oh, I love so many writers. You know, Jhumpa Lahiri, Arundhati Roy. I just read this writer called Radhika Govindrajan, who wrote this ethnography called Animal Intimacies. And it's about this cluster of towns in the Himalayas where people in their relationships with animals, like whether that's cows and goats that they have or bears and leopards that are in the forest, through their relationships with these animals, their understanding of what family means is expanded. And I found that such an interesting book. So if you're into nonfiction, highly recommend. I also, I just read The Death of Vivek Oji by...
Love this book.
So good, so good. It's just a really beautiful, heartbreaking, stunningly crafted novel. I'm still thinking about the agility of the movement in this book. I really loved it. And then one I'll recommend, which I also loved this summer, is called American Harvest by Marie Mutsuki Market. And this one is about something that I had no clue happens, but there are crews of people who harvest wheat, and they travel among different farms harvesting wheat. And so the author follows such a crew. I think they go from Texas to Idaho. And it's opening up from that. It's this beautiful book about regional history, geology, birds. It's just a beautiful, beautiful book. It's a big one, but I devoured it.
Ingrid, what about you?
I love Arundhati Roy as well. Yeah, everything that she's written. Even just Walking with the Comrades, I felt like was such a fascinating, interesting book. But yeah, The God of Small Things, I think I must have read that book at least 10 times by now. Like, I just love the way that book works. When I think of writers that have maybe had the most impact, I think it would probably be like Franz Kafka and Jorge Luis Borges are just writers that I've always revisited and have read everything by. Recently, a book that, yeah, I think I finished and then I started again was Natalie Diaz's Postcolonial Love poem. So beautiful. And there was something, I got my copy right in March when we were sheltering in place. And there was something about that book that was just so grounding and so beautiful. Yeah.
Lovely. For both of you, did either of you get beta readers for your novels? And if so, how did you parse feedback versus, trusting your gut, basically?
I was very protective of my book, and I felt that I needed solitude for it. So I workshopped. I have a very dear friend of mine who's a brilliant writer, and she and I have our two-person workshops where we exchanged work. And after that, when I felt like I had a draft that was ready to share, I think I shared it with 2 friends and my husband, maybe 3 people. But at that point, I was asking them to tell me where they were bored and what they found unclear. So just like, I knew I was done. I knew the book was more or less where it needed to be, but I needed to see if I had blind spots where I had just missed a point of confusion or something like that. I definitely believe in listening to your work and being honest with yourself about what you hear when you ask it questions.
I have a friend that I exchange work with, and I exchanged my novel with while he was working on his novel, which is out now. So it's Michael Zapata. And we exchanged, our novels as we were working on them, and read like several drafts of each other's work. And we knew each other in Chicago, and afterwards he moved, and so it just kind of became a kind of like a correspondence relationship, which was really wonderful to just kind of have. I mean, I love when you can have a relationship with another writer through their work, like when you can no longer see them. And I love what you're saying, Megha, about like boredom. I did something very differently, but I have a friend who's very easily bored. And so I had this thing where I just was giving myself a challenge, because we hang out a lot. If we were at a bar together at night, I would try to tell him a part of the story of the novel, and then the challenge was to keep his attention, like in a bar while we're drinking. So it was a very high bar, but it kind of did tell me in a way, like if I couldn't keep his attention, he was like, hold on, I don't know, I need to go get another drink, which is kind of like code for like, I don't want to do this right now. Then I knew that something needed to change. That something wasn't holding his attention. So I did that with him, throughout when I was editing the novel, which was a fun way to think about edits.
Love that.
We have time for one last question, which is nice and light. Ingrid, will you tell us what your writing color is? And I will also give to Megha, if you had one, what would it be?
Love it. It's kind of like a navy blue, but maybe it's more of an indigo. Actually, the color of the cover of my book, like that blue, is the blue. And when I got the cover, I was like, what is, like, can the person who designed it, like, can they see me in my home? Like, I don't.
Oh, not even, oh, wow.
Yeah, so it wasn't even, I was just really surprised to like see the color that I like wrote it in, and then see it on the cover. Yeah.
Wow, that's fate.
Well, I don't have a writing color, but I might have to change that. And it would probably, following from the cover of my book, it probably has to be orange.
Yeah, that's what I was going to guess. All right. Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David.
Yes, thank you, Ingrid, Megha, and David. This has been a truly delightful conversation. And thank you to everyone watching. Honestly, between your thoughtful questions and generous praise, you've been just a fantastic audience. I'm going to be sending a link to the recording of this event tomorrow, so keep an eye out if you'd like to share with friends and family. As a reminder, you can find both authors' books here tonight and much more at the Penguin Random House website. And if you're interested in attending more lovely events like the one tonight, you can find updates on Doubleday's Eventbrite page. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.